everybody. Today is an extra special day. I'm here with Iona Wayland, a dark fantasy author, as well as a trauma therapist, and we are here to talk all about writing mental illness. This topic was requested by two of my patrons over on Patreon, Griffin Grayson and CL Dixon. Both of them were curious about the do's and don'ts of writing characters with mental illness, the day-to-day aspects, and how to avoid offensive cliches. And given that it is officially Mental Health Awareness Month, now felt like the perfect time to dive in. I have some experience with mental illness. I have depression, anxiety, and PTSD, but Iona here is our expert, and I'm super excited to pick her brain. So everyone, please say hello to my wonderful friend. Iona, please introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Hello, I'm Iona Wayland. I am a dark fantasy author, and I also have a touch of supernatural horror within my debut novel, Ashes. My day job is that I am a specialized trauma and child counselor, and I focus my novel, Ashes, on what it's like to live with PTSD. It's an allegory for that. I'm a sensitivity reader, and I focus on diversity as well as mental illness in fiction. So a sensitivity reader makes sure that a person's manuscript or work of fiction does not portray people negatively or depict any harmful stereotypes or cliches.
On a related note, in case you missed the announcement, for Mental Health Awareness Month, I am hosting a fundraiser for the Trevor Project, an incredible organization that provides crisis prevention and suicide intervention for queer youths. We are accepting donations to help the Trevor Project because we are so appreciative and supportive of what they do. I've got a link to the drive listed below. For every funding goal we meet throughout this drive, a donor will be randomly chosen to win a prize. And one of those prizes is a signed copy of Iona Wayland's debut dark fantasy novel, Ashes. I have read this book. If you guys follow me on Instagram, then you have heard me talking about it incessantly because it is my favorite read of 2021 thus far. I loved it so much. I gave it a 5-star review over on BookBub. It is absolutely fantastic. I will be handing out all the prizes to all the winners at the end of the drive, but as of today, this is our funding goal, and this is the number of goals we've already hit. So keep donating and keep the prizes coming. Before we get into it, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and ring that bell. I post new videos on Wednesdays, and sometimes we bring in experts to talk about awesome shit. We have a good time here. You should totally subscribe. And my dark fantasy romance novel, The Savior Sister, is available in audiobook right now. And if you're new to audiobooks, you can listen to it on Audible for free. I got it linked below. Do it. Do it now. I said so. Yeah. And now it's time to pick Iona's brain. I'm here to ask her your 10 most popular questions all about writing mental illness. Iona, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This is just Iona's professional opinion. Your move may vary, so just take that into consideration. If you'd like me to do another video in the future that covers more specifics in mental illness, please comment below. I would be happy to do so. Number one, let's start with the basics. Would you mind defining mental illness for anyone who isn't familiar or maybe confused?
So mental injury, meaning exposure to trauma, and mental illness are just symptoms that show up uniquely for each person that gets in the way of their life. So this can mean their work life, their home life, their relationships, both familial, romantic, and platonic. These symptoms can range from healthy to distressing, and it's very unique depending on the individual.
That makes perfect sense to me. The second question, this is a question that a ton of people sent in. I know it's vague, but hear me out. How can writers represent mental illness in their fiction in a respectful manner?
Oh man, that's a tough one, but a very good question. First, I think authors need to evaluate their motivation. Why are they depicting a character this way? Why are they including it? And what's their motivation behind it? You have to be really honest with yourself so you can be honest with readers as to why you're depicting mental health in this way. Second, I feel like you should look at your own intention. What is the goal of putting a story out there that has this depiction in it? What do you want to come of it? And how do you think people will respond? Even though there's going to be a vast audience, for people potentially reading this work. And this includes people with family members who have a certain kind of disorder or illness. This includes people with the illness. This includes people who want to learn more about the illness. All of those different kinds of people and professionals like myself, all of those people boil down into two very kind of vague groups of people with the illness and people without it. And just knowing that both of those groups will be impacted completely differently when they read your work with mental illness inside of it. So something that can help make intention clear is to follow the dead writer rule, which is a little morbid, but we're all dark fantasy fans here, hopefully. So basically, imagine that you're no longer there, and there's no one to explain your book to those readers. Both of those big audience, those with the disorder and those without. How will they take what you're writing? And how will they extrapolate from what you're depicting based off of what you have in your work?
I love that you mentioned motivation, because I see especially a lot of newbie writers talking about like, oh, I'm going to depict this particular mental illness. I'm not going to name any, but there are some that come up the most prevalent in this conversation because it's so cool. That's a motivation that comes up a lot. And it's sort of like, if you're writing it because it's so cool, that's probably a bad sign. I'm just saying, it might not be the right motivation.
And that can be like a little tiny part of your motivation. But yeah, there definitely needs to be more substance behind the motivation and intention there.
Agreed. Completely agree. Number 3, how would you advise properly researching mental illness so writers who don't have personal experience can get a better understanding of it?
So first, I think you would need to know the disorder and the many different ways it can present. So don't just throw random information. Make sure that it's based off of fact, because these illnesses are all scientifically proven to exist. And that way you include the information so that it remains believable and it doesn't take readers out of your story. Also, I could rant about this for days. Never, ever base mental illness off of how it's depicted in movies and TV shows. Hollywood has some issues with depicting mental illness, and that's an understatement. Often in shows, it is poorly depicted or sensationalized, or both. The second thing is to look at the DSM-5 for US people. It's the ICD-10 in Europe or outside of the US. This is the most recent diagnostic statistical manual. Though this is very westernized, it can kind of start you on path of researching a particular illness, and it can start giving you symptoms that cause the person to meet that criteria for that illness. Another thing that's great to do is to get testimonials. It can be on YouTube, it can be memoirs, it can be blogs. There are so many wonderful testimonials out there for people within that particular community.
Awesome. I totally agree. Number 4, what are some stereotypes or misconceptions that writers should avoid perpetuating? And I know that there are probably a million. So just some of the biggest ones that jump out at you.
There are obviously quite a few of these, like you were saying, but a couple that jump out at me is using the illness as a plot twist. I've seen a lot of times where someone who has this big diagnosis, the mentally ill person is like the villain or doing things that are nefarious or have criminal activity. When in reality, a lot of mental illness, though there is some genetic component to it, it's also from mental injury. So these people have already been victims or are survivors of different things, and they're actually around 10 times more likely to be a victim of a crime than to be the perpetrator in that. So just keeping in mind that people with mental illness can be a part of a vulnerable population. Another thing that you mentioned earlier that I definitely have on popping up in my head is that people will often glamorize the mental illness. It's overly dramatized. And then the parts that are unaesthetically pleasing, these are often glossed over. And the ugly parts of whatever this illness is will be completely forgotten and not depicted at all. And the big takeaway from the glamorization of it is that no one wants a mental illness. No one wants to have an issue and to have their mental health at stake. Also, keep in mind that many disorders appear subtly. There are probably many people that you're acquainted with or that you may know that have disorders. There are many different kinds of people. who can pull it together and function normally, whatever that may mean for their job industry or with relationships, but they crumble internally or at home when they are in a safe place.
I love the part that you mentioned about how people with mental illness are usually the villains, because this is something that I say on my channel all the time. Now, I'm not saying someone with mental illness can't be a villain. However, I read this study somewhere. I've actually read like a million studies about this that say that people who suffer from trauma and hardship have a much higher chance or percentage of developing a greater sense of empathy. So for me, it's more realistic to have a good guy or like a victim in a story who has a mental illness. Also, you mentioned about how a lot of this can present subtly. I remember reading a story. It was very romanticized depression, and you could tell she suffered from depression because she was in the middle of her classroom and nothing was happening and she broke into tears. And I'm not saying that no one with depression has ever done that. I'm just saying that as someone who has depression and as someone who knows a million people with depression, that's never how I've seen it presented or experienced it myself.
Absolutely. And I like that you were able to pick up on things that weren't believable, because I was saying before, sometimes people will even overcompensate when they're in environments where they need to be on. Mm-hmm. So it's not that they don't have this disorder or they don't have enough symptoms to have this disorder. It's just that they have to pick and choose when to put their energy into making it more subtle and places where they feel comfortable enough to let themselves go a little bit.
So number 5, we hear a lot about how mental illness doesn't define a person and shouldn't be written that way. How would you recommend writing mental illness without it defining the character?
So the first thing to remember is not to write your character with their mental illness as a character trait. Mental illnesses are not character traits. You need to have people with goals and ambitions, hobbies, likes and dislikes. They're not a two-dimensional person. You need to show how that person lives and get to know them. And then the symptoms of whatever mental illness that you're researching will fall into place. Basically, all of this boils down into show, don't tell. And also, maybe people could be open to the idea that even though someone's living with a mental illness, sometimes, yes, they suffer from it, but so they can live with it in a way that works to their advantage. That would be cool to see every once in a while.
Number 6, piggybacking off that question, mental illness doesn't define a person, but sometimes it kind of does. When is it okay for mental illness to be a dominant force in that character?
So again, definitely don't want it to be a character trait, but it can be a source of pride for that person. They've overcome something very difficult, and though it might be something that they've lived with for a time or that they will live with for the rest of their life, showing that relationship of working with your brain is such a beautiful thing. You can show the person thriving and being able to use these skills that they've built up based off of the mental injury they've been through and they've survived from, or the mental illness that they are born with, and they can lead this meaningful, wonderful life. And you wouldn't describe someone as being like happy or loving or a good listener when you're writing characters. You would show them doing those things. And I feel like that can be a good way to use that trick with any kind of mental illness. If someone has anxiety, what does that even mean? Like if someone's happy, what does that mean? Or if someone's loving, what does that mean? Because for each person, it's so different. But if you show the person thriving with this illness or overcoming different things so that they have these skills to amp up their life from this illness, then I think that would start with the person being proud of who they are, but also not letting it define who they are either.
I think also something to keep in mind is that for a lot of mental illnesses, it's something that kind of comes up all the time, and you just gotta go through it. It's not like every time I get anxious, it's like I can go, okay, time out. Like sometimes I'm out to dinner with my parents, sometimes I'm working. You just kind of gotta go through it. It's not something that just derails your whole existence. And that kind of ties into the show versus tell. You wouldn't say the character is feeling anxious right now. You would show the anxiety bubbling in their chest while they're still doing the thing that they're doing.
Yes, exactly. And I love how you put that, because like most people don't have the privilege of being able to fall apart whenever a difficult thought, intrusive thought, or a particular symptom to a mental illness shows up, they have to find ways to work through them, even though it would be really cool if everyone could push the pause button.
Exactly. These people got jobs, they got families, they got kids, they got stuff to do. Number 7, mental illness is a unique experience per person. The way I experience anxiety may not be the same as someone else's experience. How would you recommend writing mental illness from a character's unique perspective?
I always say research, research, research. And no, that will not give you the full picture, but it is a great way to start. You need to know what types and subtypes there are for different kinds of symptoms, what it looks like on the spectrum from mild to moderate to highly distressing. Also, good to remember that you don't have to reach every single symptom that's listed for a disorder. You just have to meet criteria to be diagnosed. At least that's how the DSM-5 is used, at least in the US, and how to bill insurances and so on and so forth, is by meeting certain criteria that puts that kind of diagnosis for someone. Also keep in mind that there is comorbidity. That's just a fancy word that means that sometimes certain disorders always or almost always interact with another or appear with another. So anxiety and depression, those often go together. They're two sides to the same coin. And just knowing how different comorbidities would appear, you wouldn't want to fall into the trap where you're depicting someone with a mental illness and it's just the one mental illness, but because it appears so regularly with another one, it would look odd and unusual for someone to only have one thing. And just learn what your character's like. Who are they as a person? How would they interact with other people? First, foundation. And then lay on, if you take this person and they have this particular symptom, how are they going to respond during those situations? And that way it will be more authentic and unique to the human experience of someone with a mental illness or someone who has been mentally injured.
In the Savior series, Tobias suffers from mental illness. He has, in TSC, we see the most prevalent is the depression. As the series progresses, we see a little bit more of the PTSD and anxiety. And I deal with those things as well, but the way he reacts to it is not the same way that I react to it. I'm the kind of person where if I'm going through anxiety or something PTSD related, it helps for me to talk about it. Whereas with Tobias, he's the kind of person where he feels a lot of responsibility to take care of everyone around him. So he doesn't want to burden them with his struggles. It's easy for me to write him like this because that goes with his character. That's just how he is as a person. He's the kind of person who feels this burden and pressure to be strong for everyone else around him. So I really like that you touched on the fact that it's going to depend on the kind of person you're writing.
I love how you depict mental illness for both characters, but I also don't want to give spoilers either. But yeah, that was definitely something that drew me to the Savior series, just because I was like, oh shit, like you're depicting like for real these things and these characters. Like this is realistic.
Thank you so much. I mean, if you're going to go through trauma, at least let it make your writing better, right? It's like,
Exactly.
At least help me make realistic characters. So there's like one positive there. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Okay, number 8. When does writing about mental illness cross the line from being necessary to being gratuitous and exploitative?
Definitely, first one that pops to mind is sensationalizing. Like, don't sensationalize illnesses. Keep in mind the audience that will be reading this. Also, personal pet peeve, I have a really hard time when there's a main character that isn't mentally ill, but there's a side character often used as a prop to make the main character look good or to depict like a saviorism within that character. And ultimately, that is so unhealthy. I want to scream every time I see it because I'm like, everything about this is triangulation, but whatever. So I think that just making sure you're not depicting people two-dimensionally is a great start. Also, when mental illnesses, and I know you touched on this previously, that are used solely to make the main character look edgy or alternative or villainous when it's like real bad, but just like using it more as an aesthetic than actually what it looks like. Going through mental injury and trauma and or having a mental illness does not make that person like deep or wise or like ahead of their years. Like this is a really sad thing that no one should have to go through, whatever this may be, but this person's living with it and not to make that character like on a pedestal just because they have this illness.
I don't know about you. I am super deep and wise because of I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding.
I believe it. I believe it. Oh, something else that I think crosses the line into being exploitative is when there are characters that have to make it to a certain point and they have to have a particular mental illness to be indoctrinated into something. They're like the strong, badass type, but what makes them strong and badass is because they're ill, mentally ill, and it should be based on them as a person. There's some themes here. It should be based on their character and not whether or not they have a mental illness.
Just to elaborate, inspiration porn, that's kind of what you were talking about with the savior character, like, I'll save you, or like the love interest where it's like, they're mentally ill and I'm not, so I will cure them. I totally think that it's 100% valid for someone who is mentally ill to seek comfort in their partner. I think that's great and fine to depict in writing, but there's a difference between that and I'm gonna save you from your brain, like, and I'm gonna make your mental illness disappear, and now I'm the savior of the book and happily ever after because I cured your depression with my dick. Just the using mental illness as inspiration porn, like, wow, I'm so inspired by you because of what you're going through. It's just like, oh God, like, get inspired by something else, man.
That's so tiring too, because it's this celebration. Depending on what the mental illness is, it's a celebration that someone went through trauma, and that doesn't sit right with me very much. Also, the whole like love will cure all wounds is not true. Mm-hmm. I wish it was, because I think that would, if that was like, I'm your medicine now, like that would be great. But it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, that would just make it easy. Just get yourself a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a non-binary friend, and you're good to go. Like, I'm cured now. I wish that would be nice. Number 9, this was a question on a lot of people's mind, and I know that you can't speak for everyone on this, but in your opinion, is it okay for people without mental illness to write about characters with mental illness?
So of course, I can't give my stamp of approval or speak for all of the different groups out there with mental illness. And I don't want to say what is or isn't someone's story to tell, because there are many different people to take into account with that. Nor can anyone police like if someone has a disorder or not, because like we were talking about before, sometimes there will be people that write about things that they didn't realize that they had, and then when they get diagnosed with it, they're like, oh, that's why I really wanted to write that. But again, look at your intention, look at the motivation. What are they? Be 100% honest with yourself, because this is something that's going out there and can have a huge impact on different groups. Always keep those two audiences in mind, those with the disorder, those without. There's way more layers to it, but the hard and fast rule is those with the disorder and those without will be reading this. What are they going to take away from it? Do research, and then on top of that, like, you start with the research, include people within that community. A horrible example of what not to do is Sia's movie Music. She had saviorism motivation, I would guess, though I'm not sure because I'm not Sia, but she absolutely did not include the autistic community in her work. And she seems to have had the best of intentions, I hope, but because of not including the community, it will cause harm. And on the flip side, even if you have this disorder, even if you have and have been diagnosed with what you're depicting in your work or for your character, there is such a stigma with mental illness and going to therapy and getting mental wellness checked that it's highly, highly possible that you have internalized those stigmas. And we do not want to have those stigmas bleed into the page subconsciously while you're writing on your manuscript. So I know that was like a really roundabout answer to whether you do or don't have it. I personally can't possibly say if that's your story to tell, then by all means tell it. It's just being extremely mindful and intentional with your work.
This kind of bleeds into the next question, or our last question, number 10. What are some popular resources writers can implement when writing mental illness?
This is what I was made for. There's NAMI, that stands for the National Alliance for Mental Illness. Then there's NIMH, which stands for the National Institute of Mental Health. You can also look into the National Domestic Violence Network, and And if you want it to be honed in a bit more, you can look at anti-domestic violence in your local area or your state's coalition against domestic violence. Of course, YouTube, that's a fun place. There are tons of TED Talks. Ones that come to mind when people are just starting to learn about mental health and how to depict that appropriately is Nadine Burke Harrison. She goes through the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, or ACEs. Like, what number is it? A person can have a level of 10. These are just traumas that people before they're the age of 18 may have been exposed to, and what happens mentally and physically because of being exposed to those kinds of traumas. Then there's also Brené Brown. You can look at, I know you talked about vulnerability earlier, where being vulnerable with a partner is so important. And it can be steps like those of being courageous enough to be vulnerable with other people that increase our resiliency factors and can help us thrive despite a mental illness. And then, of course, the testimonials, blogs, there's free webinars and panels out there that would be cool to look into. A bunch of stuff. All of these things are on YouTube. Then, like I mentioned before, the DSM-5 or the ICD-10. And last but not least, you could hire a sensitivity reader to double check some things, because we need more eyes on work. We can only write to the best of our ability. And there are some hidden biases that we all have that we might not be able to see unless a third party looks at it and goes over what you're depicting to make sure that it's not harmful for the community.
I completely agree. I cannot emphasize enough, get a goddamn sensitivity reader. And I mean, we got one right here who does an amazing job. Also, at a very minimum, make sure you have a lot of beta readers and you've got a handful of critique partners. And if you can get people to beta read your work who are dealing with whatever mental illness you're writing about and are comfortable reading about it. I wouldn't just stand on a corner and be like, hey, got depression? You got depression? I got a book for you. I mean, like, make sure they're comfortable reading about it. Some people, they're not going to want to read about it. Respect that, understand that. But if you can find beta readers who are comfortable reading about it and also deal with it, they can help give you an idea of whether or not you're hitting it out of the park. But absolutely, sensitivity reader is super helpful and super important, because even if you think you did a great job and you did all the research, there might be goof ups you made that just fell through the cracks and you didn't realize.
Yes, and going off of what you're saying about beta readers and critique partners, like, just because someone's been through these things that you're depicting does not mean they're obligated to read your book. I know we all know this, right? But also, on top of that, when it's to the point of publication, even before that, it's really great if you include trigger warnings. You don't have to include in every single chapter, page, or what have you, but just preparing the reader, whoever that might be, mentally for what they're about to get into, because that way they can immerse themselves in your book.
Exactly. And I've heard people complain about trigger warnings saying, but then they might not buy my book. And it's like, isn't that a good thing? Like, do you want the wrong audience buying your book? Because if it's something that they would not enjoy and you're warning them about it, if they buy the book, they're not gonna like it and they're gonna give you a bad review, so it's not only doing your audience a favor, it's doing yourself a favor. You are making sure that you are getting it in the hands of the right people who would be comfortable with the content and not the kind of people who would be uncomfortable with the content. So stop being a dumbass and include the trigger warnings. Come on.
Yeah, let's not hurt people.
Right. I mean, such an easy way to be considerate. There's just no excuse. And I've also heard people say, but it'll include spoilers. One of my trigger warnings in The Savior's Champion is graphic violence. It's like, there's blood on the cover. Everyone knows that that's not a spoiler that there's going to be blood. If you're giving a trigger warning and that's somehow a spoiler, then you probably have not marketed the book correctly.
Yeah, and if it's that big of a spoiler, because in my trigger warnings there, I guess, could be considered spoilers out there, but I also don't want to use mental health or trauma as a plot twist. That's what we don't do. So
exactly. If it's like, oh my gosh, this is some big spoiler, it's like, well, maybe then you used it for the wrong reason. I'm just saying.
Check yourself.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. Why don't you tell everyone where they can follow you and where they can pick up ashes, which is amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. You can follow me. I'm the most active on Instagram. My handle is at Iona.Wayland. Also, I have my author website. My books are available in paperback and ebook on Amazon, and I have an audiobook in the works.
Everyone, I will have all of Iona's information listed below in the description, so definitely check her out. Don't forget, everyone, in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, we are hosting a fundraiser for the Trevor Project to help queer youths dealing with crisis and suicide. I've got a link to the fundraiser listed below, and with every monetary goal we meet, a donor will be randomly selected to win a prize. And one of those prizes is my favorite read of 2021 thus far, Ashes by our very own Iona Wayland. It's an incredible book. You definitely want to read it. A huge thank you to Griffin Grayson and CL Dixon for requesting today's video. If you'd like a video dedicated to you, or if you want the chance to participate in tons of rewards, check me out on Patreon. You get early access to videos, there's signed books, there's a monthly live stream. We have a private writing group. It's awesome. Definitely check it out. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I post new videos on Wednesdays, and if you want to be alerted as soon as I upload, ring that bell. The Savior Sister is currently available in audiobook right now. And if you are new to audiobooks, you can listen to it on Audible for free. So if you're into dark fantasy and romance, you want to check out my #1 bestseller, check it out right now. I've got it linked below. And be sure to follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook, BookBub, and of course, you can tweet me at Jenna Moreci. Bye!
It's me, Pippa. Have you subscribed to Jenna's channel yet? Oh, you must. It's so much fun. She talks about writing and heroism and romance, and sometimes she says very naughty words, but I rather enjoy it. Subscribe to her channel and ring the bell.